Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started here just a minute. Don't forget to mute yourselves upon entry. That would be great. All right, let me give it 1 minute just so we can go through and kind of mute some people here. Something happened with my settings. Sorry. All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me just bring up my little script here so I don't forget anything, which is not that one, which is this one. So here it is. All right. Sorry about that. So hello, everyone. My name is Matt Hardy. I am the Program Director for Planning and Performance Management at AASHTO. I want to welcome you to our Transportation Performance Management webinar series on TPM and Equity. We're happy to see everyone today. We had about 250 people register for this webinar. So many of you are probably joining us for the first time. So welcome. We're happy that you could join us. Just as a little bit of a background, this webinar series is being hosted by both FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, and AASHTO. It's been an ongoing webinar series. This is number 11. And this actually dates back to an asset management webinar series that we've been doing with FHWA since, I want to say, 2011. Even before webinars were popular, we were doing it. So it's an exciting time to be here, and I'm really happy that we have so many people joining us today. So for those that are committee members of the AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management, that's the AASHTO committee sponsoring this webinar, I just want to point out that we do have a membership webinar meeting scheduled for Thursday, March 31st from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. You can get more information about that either from the emails that I have sent out, or if you go to the TPM portal, tpm-portal.com. You can access information about that membership webinar. I think it's going to be a great webinar. We have these once a quarter just to stay engaged with the committee members. And it is also sponsored in part by the TPM Pooled Fund Program. And the TPM Pooled Fund Program is also helping to fund and sponsor this webinar series. So during that membership webinar, I'm going to be providing more information about the transition that we're currently going through from a pooled fund program to an AASHTO technical service program. A lot of important information is going to be given at that meeting. So please, again, if you're a Committee on Performance-Based Management member and you want to maintain access, this will be a little bit of jargon, access to your CAT lab, PM3 tools, web-based tools, and that sort of thing. We have a lot of great information to share with you. So please plan on joining us for that program. And I also want to say thank you to the 20 states that have already signed up for the AASHTO TPM technical service program. We couldn't do programs, webinars like this without having initially that pooled fund program and now the technical service program. I'm going to post the 20 states that have signed up for the TPM TSP in the chat. And if you're not from one of those states, please consider signing up for the technical service program. So today is our 11th monthly, bi-monthly TPM webinar series. And we invite state DOT attendees to encourage your agencies to, well, sorry, I already talked about that. So if you want to sign up for the TSP, the Technical Service Program, feel free to contact me, mhardy@aashto.org for more information. So today's topic is on transportation performance management and equity. This is going to be an interactive webinar. We're going to introduce you and sort of discuss the topic initially, and then we're going to go into breakout groups. And the breakout rooms, or the breakout rooms, are going to be focused on sort of 3 different areas. One is on organizational management and culture. The second one is on communication, and the third one is on data. And we'll provide more information about that later on in the webinar. So hopefully this will be a really engaging and informative session. I'm personally looking forward to starting a dialogue within the TPM community, as well as the broader transportation community on this very important topic. So just a few brief logistics. First, for more information on this webinar series, to find a recording of it, to get all the meeting material, go to our transportation performance management knowledge portal, information portal, or website, which is at tpm-portal.com. Click on TPM webinar series under events in the main menu. Again, links to the video, the recording of this, and the slides will be there. And finally, as always, please make sure to mute yourself unless you are speaking. Most of today's sessions are going to be interactive. We're going to go into breakout, so feel free to use the Zoom functionality to raise your hand, turn on your camera, and during those breakouts, please do participate and let us know what you think. Join in on the conversation. And now let me turn it over to Kiana Park from Spy Pond Partners, who serves as a great partner. It says so in the name in doing these webinar series. So she's going to go over the agenda and take it from there. So thanks, Yana, all yours.
Thanks, Matt. First up on our agenda today, Steve Gay will provide a welcome on behalf of Federal Highways. After that, William Johnson from the Colorado DOT will provide a state DOT perspective and introduce today's topic of TPM and equity. William's presentation will prepare all of us for the interactive portion of the agenda. We'll break into groups organized around three aspects of TPM: organizational management and culture as topic 1, communication, and data. We'll spend around 35 to 40 minutes discussing the equity topics related to each of these TPM components. We'll follow up our breakout sessions with report outs from the breakout facilitators and a large group discussion about how to advance equity within the transportation sector under the TPM umbrella. Matt will wrap us up with next steps, and that will be the end of our webinar. So now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Gay for a welcome on behalf of Federal Highways. Steve.
Thank you, Yana. If Federal Highway is happy working with AASHTO in presenting these webinars, we appreciate this continuing cooperation. The TPM program has now been in place several years. I'm very happy to see good quality uniform data across a number of important areas where we can measure system condition and performance, track it. 2022 is an important year for TPM and asset management as we look at where we are now as compared to where we were a few years ago. Clarifying, has the condition and performance in your state or jurisdiction changed over the past few years? Has it improved, declined, or stayed about the same? Is your state, MPO, or other jurisdiction satisfied? Will these trends continue? Did you get the changes in condition and or performance that you expected? Do you need to change your agency's investment strategies? Are the projects being programmed consistent with the investment strategies you had in your asset management plan or other plan? Have you looked deeper and are you using the data to see how the different districts or cities that you're working with, how they're managing their network and making the choices in how they spend the money? Is leadership using the data? Are the districts using the data? Is there a good reason why some districts or regions or locales are improving and others may not be? Is it an accountability issue? Are they using the data? Some say performance management is a business that we as DOTs are in. Also, I believe we all have a better understanding of the long-term goals and the shorter-term targets, state of good repair, other goals, etc. Are the goals and targets in your jurisdiction real in your state DOT? For example, 10% poor bridges is your goal and target? Really? Really? With regard, and I understand there are some cases where it may be, it needs to get worse rather than better. I understand those. With regard to equity, this is a real important issue for all of us. To what degree is this being considered in your state or jurisdiction? Is it being considered in your asset management plan, etc.? I know I heard from a couple state DOTs earlier today that they will likely pour it into the TAMP for 2022. We believe there are opportunities to consider equity when developing asset management plans. And I'll just close by saying, you know, is there a way the TPM data, are there ways this data can be used as you and your agency consider addressing equity? With that, I'm going to pass it to Mr. William Johnson from Colorado DOT. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I also want to say thank you, Kiana and Matt. And I got to tell you, when we were pondering what this webinar series would be, one of the first things I said was, wow, that's going to be an uncomfortable topic. But in reflection, everything that we've gone through over the past 2 years with the pandemic, some of the societal disturbance we've experienced, you know, a la George Floyd and such, I think that we're getting a little comfortable with being uncomfortable. But when it comes to TPM and equity, really what I'm trying to hope to continue organizational inertia in discussions is there's a lot to figure out, but we're not starting from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and give a quick thanks to Lori. She'll be running the slides for me today. Next slide, please, Lori. Yeah, so what does equity have to do with TPM? And here I've just quickly copied the definition and information from FHWA on what TPM is. And I'm not going to read everything here, and some of the slides are going to be dense. But really, the key pieces that I wanted to point out are in orange. And there it says, provides key information to help decision makers to understand the consequences of investment decisions, as well as to improve communications between decision makers, stakeholders, and the traveling public. Now, why I highlighted that is because I've spent 22 years working for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And here I am the Performance and Asset Management Branch Manager for CDOT. And naturally, I manage performance management. I also manage asset management, as well as risk and resilience and economic analysis. And with all those pieces, there's sort of an underlying theme, a question. That is, do I know who my stakeholders are? Do I know about communities? And it's typical for a DOT when they do a large project, something that requires the NEPA process, to go out and do environmental justice. What is less typical are those smaller projects, the things that are more directly related towards transportation performance management, safety projects, asset management projects, system reliability. Although we do get a little bit of information from the typical planning process, I don't necessarily have a good pipeline directly into communities to understand what their concerns are. And there brings the question of, what are my equity considerations? And more so, how do I begin to consider equity when I'm making decisions about transportation performance management investments? Next slide, please. Now, why should you care about equity? This is the part where William throws an executive order at you. And if you've worked at a DOT, you probably have many as an executive order thrown in your face. And you just kind of said, yeah, that's great. Get to it when I get to it. However, remember I said, I've been here a while, been doing this for 22 years. I know that executive orders are really precursors to greater things. And I can point back to transportation performance management, climate change, and equity. Everything that we deal with eventually came out in some official thing that was really funded by FHWA, and there was some reporting expectations. And while I'm not saying that those reporting expectations on equity exist now, what I can say is executive orders should have a good track record of becoming something tangible, official. And so we should be paying attention to this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we should be paying attention to it. Well, what the heck is equity? USDOT, and again, from another executive order, we're going to get paper cuts in our eyeballs from all the executive orders here, defines equity. And when you look at the definition here, it is very broad because what it includes in that term of equity is diversity. It's a great range of considerations that let's think about how we make transportation investment decisions, especially in light of TPM. Do we have information that supports the opinion of communities? When I look at this, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ, rural areas, lesbian, gay, bisexual, different ethnicities, I do not have a great deal of information on how the investments that I help the department make affects them. And that's the thing that we need to think about is when we're communicating things is, do we understand how these people are affected by our investment decisions? I know that from a TPM perspective, and more specifically asset management, I'm trying to achieve a state of good repair for my pavement, but that's more like an output. I really need to be interested in outcomes. What are the expectations from the community? And more so, what are the consequences the community can affect if I choose not to invest in their poor pavement versus another community? Next slide, please. More on communication. So I'm just going to put this out here. One thing I wanted to say is, I'm hoping that this is a safe space. Portions of it will be recorded. So I think I'm probably more on the hook than everybody else. Equity doesn't mean equal. That's not what we're talking about here. Equity is not critical race theory. There's a big difference. We need more specifics on how equity is achieved, and more so when we look at performance management, how we understand how it's demonstrated for communities. And then the last thing I have on here is it's time that we focus on investments in infrastructure. And this is beyond those large projects that DOTs love to cut ribbons on. This is more like the everyday, every year. These are the things that are supporting transportation performance measures. Next slide, please. So Colorado, we also have another consideration of why we care about equity. It's this little thing called Senate Bill 21260 or SB 260. With Senate Bill 260, we effectively created an environmental justice and equity branch. Marcia is our new Chief Equity Officer. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the opportunity to participate in this webinar, but I've talked to her a great deal about what her priorities are. And a lot of the things that we're going to discuss in this webinar align with what she believes a priority in terms of equity and transportation equity. Now, for us specifically in Colorado, our law requires us to work directly with disproportionately impacted people. And I will show you a data set that supports that. But also it calls for equity to work with other programs within the department. One of those programs being mine, but also in planning and in project construction and development. Now, typically when we think about equity, really the mind, if you're in a DOT, it'll go very fast towards, okay, what does my DBE look like? Am I meeting those requirements? Here we are talking directly about those outward investments we make on behalf of taxpayers and to benefit travelers. Also, it talks here is that we really need to understand the impact of the transportation decisions. and how it affects health and quality of life. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to data, I wanted to just give you some examples that we're not just, scratching at the ground here. There are data sets that exist. If some of you are familiar with SOVI, it's used a lot on the risk and resilient front. However, SOVI is an index, and it could be very abstract if you're working with it. But if you're able to go into the details, you're able to look at the individual factors that are contained within Social Vulnerability Index. And there, you may find some useful information. Of course, you will have some ethnicity factors, but you also have age. You'll have poverty. You'll have percent of unoccupied housing units. With that, it's just a data set to look at and really start asking, can I use this? Can I analyze it? Can I blend it with traditional TPM performance measures and data to make more informative decisions? Next slide, please. Here is CRE, Community Resilience Estimates. This information is available from US Census, and it includes indicators such as, of course, population and age come up there, but it also has income, health insurance, educational attainment, urban versus rural areas, disability, and the one I really like is that vehicle access. Pointing to my example on pavement, who cares about good pavement if you don't have access to a vehicle? And so those are some of the data points that we really should start taking interest in. Next slide, please. Now, this one's specific to Colorado. I'm hoping that other states are beginning to have different types of information as well. By no means did a thorough examination of what data sets other states have. And yeah, I did go for easy pickings there. So this is proportionally impacted communities. And this is information that Colorado is required to use with certain types of investments. Colorado's goal really is to, with equity, ensure that we understand the impacts of our investment decisions, but also we have some very specific clean air, GHG, and disruptive technology and travel that we're hoping to achieve. And this is one of the base data sets that support it. Now, I've shown you some data, but I'm gonna arm you with a little bit more information. When we're talking about TPM is, okay, safety is a consideration. How do we know when we make investment decisions, things like women bicyclists who tend to be very nervous and scared to use certain bicycle pathways? That's what studies have shown. We collect a lot of information about fatalities, but are we engaging our stakeholders on that information? When we get to things such as benefit cost analysis, which has a lot of information requirements dealing with, okay, if we're going to be spending federal dollars, what is the benefit we're going to be getting for it? We should know that going into it, that those are really biased towards higher income communities because those people are willing to pay for a benefit where others may not be able to pay for a benefit. Not just that, but protect, which I'm going to point to in a slide here in a second, which deals with risk and resilience and grant funding as well as formula funding for that. When we look at benefit cost, those direct economic losses are based on monetary value. That monetary value is based upon wealth. And if we're thinking about rural and low-income areas, we're going to have some challenges in getting a good benefit cost ratio up unless we start looking at other methods, other data sources, other analysis techniques to do so. Next slide, please. Now, there are some opportunities in bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, otherwise known as IIJA, I've pointed out a couple that deal directly with transportation. And you can see that, there's a significant amount of money for Healthy Streets program, $100 million a year from fiscal years 2022 to 2026. That's every year. Active transportation investment in infrastructure. $200 million over that same time period, every single year. I'm not going to attempt to do bad math in my head while I'm talking here. Protect, that's the one that deals with risk and resilience. 25 million between 22 and 23, so 50 million, could do that math, and then 30 million a year from the 2024 to 2026 period. That's for community resilience. But what does community resilience mean unless you start to consider equity within it? Next slide, please. Now, we're going to have some breakout groups. I've tried to prepare you with just some information. Some of the slides are dense. This is being recorded. So you'll have the information there. And I'm not sure if Matt can post my presentation there. If anything, I wanted you to be able to take some of those dense slides back with you, since I didn't speak to them and I wasn't going to read the slide. But our breakout rooms will be on organizational management, culture, communication, and data. And with those, we'll have some questions. Now, those breakout rooms aren't recorded. And I want you to feel comfortable that those are safe rooms. So anything that you say there, we'll change the names to protect the guilty. But really, we want you to feel open and free to have an honest and frank discussion about equity, because we know that it could be charged. And so I want to give you some level of comfort that we'll be taking notes on this. We will be having a report out, but please feel free to have those open and frank discussions during those breakout rooms, which aren't recorded. And make sure you participate. We're all learning in this together. We don't have all the answers. Between me, Matt, and Hiana, we'd like to hear what you think about it and to see if you have any challenges that require solutions or any solutions that have been deployed to meet those challenges. And I think right now I'm going to pass it back to you, Hiana. I'm going to quickly go through the questions while Hiana's talking.
All right, thank you, William, and thank you for your leadership in engaging our community on this topic. So as we've already mentioned, we're going to be organizing around 3 TPM aspects. The first one is organizational management and culture. The second one is communication. And the third one is data. And we're going to have 3 groups for each topic. So there'll be 9 breakout groups. And with the benefit of William's introduction to the topic of TPM and equity, based on your own experiences and those within your agencies, we want to invite you to have an open dialogue with your breakout groups around your assigned topic. We have a set of questions that the facilitators will use, but we really see this webinar as kind of an introductory event on the topic. And so feel free to share whatever you're thinking, whatever concerns you have. The breakout facilitators are going to help guide your discussion. And because we do have a large group today, you're going to be randomly assigned to a breakout group. So once you're in a group, you feel free to move to a different group if you would rather be part of a different topic discussion. And if you have any technical issues in going to a group, kind of remain in the main room, and Lori and Abby will assist putting you in the right in the group you want to go to. We know that much of this topic is new under the umbrella of TPM, so we think it's totally okay to leave our sessions with more questions than answers. But I think getting your questions is going to be very helpful to kind of shaping what we do next. We want to encourage you to explore, learn, and think about the questions we need to collectively address to advance equity as it relates to TPM. And beyond what you'll take back to your agencies from this discussion, we also hope to generate some ideas for future research needs, case studies, technology transfers, and any kind of sharing implementation opportunities. There will be a report out after the breakout session so we can hear from what each group came up with, and we're going to be documenting that and pooling it together so that we can have kind of a collective understanding of where we are and the input from all of you out there. So let's go into our breakout rooms.
Hope those, I know for us, the 30 minutes or 35 minutes went by very quickly. Next thing I know, Shannon's saying, hey, it's we got 60 seconds left. It's like, hold on, we don't have enough, we need more time. So anyway, so thanks for participating. We want to do quick report out and discussions. So we had 9 breakout rooms. I'm going to go down the list. I'm actually going to go from bottom to the top just to kind of mix things up and kind of keep it a little crazy. That way, Perry, who thought he was going to be last, is going to have to go first. So we'll just do it that way. I'm putting on my adjunct professor cap to keep people on their toes. So 1 minute, 90 seconds at most, sort of summary of some of the key takeaways from your groups. And Perry, why don't we start with you with data group 3?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for letting me go first. I had planned to say yes, all of those data sources that the other groups had mentioned, we talked about. But maybe the main thing to say for our group in our discussion was that we were looking at the first question of authoritative data sets that we can use for equity. And we thought that maybe authoritative started to lead the discussion in the wrong direction. We needed to look at non-traditional data sources. And there are some interesting examples that we talked about, distribution of calls into a call center relating to demographic and other data that was interesting and productive for our discussion. And then to the next question, what insights can the data bring to investment decision-making concerning equity? There we were really looking prospectively, in our group, this was, there was a lot of interest in this area, but not a lot of experience or applications yet. But there was an interesting comment from WASHTO that they're developing some tools and associated best practices for equity analysis, integrated into the planning and programming process, assessing impacts on projects, and then also focusing on communicating the results out. And then finally, in the category of additional data or analytical approaches needed to move us forward, there was another great example from WASHTO of a diversity dashboard and data warehouse, a clearinghouse for equity data. And really, the idea would be to make these data accessible across the agency.
5 seconds.
Why don't I stop there? Thanks, Matt.
All right, Perry. Sorry,
No.
I'm going to use my hook. All right, next up, data group number 2, Ed Hug from SEMCOG.
Okay, we had a nice little discussion in our group too. I think the 2 data sets that I was not as familiar with that we talked about a little bit were the EPA's EJ screen and the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool. I wasn't as familiar with those. And some of the stuff that we've been working with, we've been doing big stuff with broadband. It wasn't as important prior to March 2020, but all of a sudden when we had board members who are crashing through their data caps on their Verizon hotspot, suddenly became very important, and discuss that a little bit. And another data set that that's being developed is a flood risk tool and determining where projects are happening with flood risk and how those flood risks are happening and the distribution, whether it's location, high-risk populations, and how we can mitigate that.
Great, thanks, Ed. Next up, data group number 1, William Johnson.
Yeah, so, in terms of authoritative data sets, I think really we're looking at what exists, what's low hanging fruit, and more so what what are the things we don't have to pay for, because that may be a different business case altogether. Nelson Hoffman with FHWA, oh no, don't dare cough, excuse me, pointed out that they're doing a leading and lagging indicator study, and through a literature review, they found that there's limitations to national data sets when it comes to equity. And so I thought that that's interesting. The other thing was, of course, census data, especially like the Census Transportation Planning Package. One note here is transit probably has a lot more information about their communities than DOTs do. And I say that just because you can read a bunch of articles how transit is sort of shifting some of the services that they provide to be more social service related type activities. They're no longer just driving buses and trains. Insights that we could look at in terms of how can equity improve investment decision making. Well, it makes us more proactive, keeps our eye on the outcomes, more downstream effects of those investments. Specifically, who are we affecting? It helps us quantify our goals. And one of the goals was stated that it's to provide access to the community through transportation, hopefully. It drives investments. That's what data does. And when we're able to overlay those things, we can optimize the investment decisions. And what are additional data or analytical approaches that are needed to move us forward? Well, point out the obvious, the one that I started with is the lack of national data sets. Hey, nobody likes to pay for data. And especially when you're talking about non-traditional data sets, it's like, where do we start? So we really look for things like a national standard, a national framework for collecting that data. Data that is objective, that we could use for resource allocation. One of the goals behind equity data is to reduce the amount of bias that's included in it. But what is that? What does that mean? Not just objective data sets and quantifiable, but qualitative data sets that we can actually use. Going quickly to, well, what are some of the research or documentation pain points? Big one is understanding how decisions are influenced by public opinion. And I say that specific towards how do we use the voice of the community in making TPM investments? And it goes beyond, hey, roads stink in Colorado, to being very specific and TPM oriented. Examples of success. Where have people been able to successfully include equity considerations to drive TPM related investment decisions? What are our partners across the pond doing? International good practices, do those exist? And the last one I'll end with is benefit cost. With so much money locked into competitive grants on Bill IIJA, is, are there good practices that we can include equity considerations as a quantifiable benefit?
All right, thanks, William. Next up, Kiana Park with communication group number 3.
Thanks, Matt. So our group had a lot of discussion. First, we started out with equity, and it's pretty clear from our group that people are working on equity, but there's not a kind of a uniform consensus, or within their agencies, they have the end-all definition, but that, we talked about fairness, inclusion, accessibility, affordability, remediation as elements of equity. And then 2 states, Washington State and Caltrans, shared some links to how they define equity in their strategic plans, and an equity statement that Caltrans had. So that we'll have that in our notes. Then we moved on to how can you actually promote equity through internal and external communications. And one person shared that they have an equity, diversity, and inclusion task force. And others share that they have efforts to reach diverse communities through their consultants, using techniques such as surveys, presentations, focus groups, discussions, and opinions. So that was interesting. And then we ended with, what can we do nationally better to kind of do better with TPM, equity, and communications? The number one item I think people thought were more trainings that are addressed at getting people in transportation agencies to understand and look at everything through an equity lens. And then the other was having more direct funding from the feds to address equity better. And then we talked about the potential of an equity clearinghouse where you can share equity statements, different kinds of equity plans, tools, data, etc. And then I know, okay, last one. And then the last one was in the IIJA and bill resources, being clearer on what's available for equity, including guidance. Done.
Thanks, Shanna. Just trying to be equitable for everybody, and giving them the hook. Next up, Kelly Travelby, Communications Group number 2. Kelly, you are muted still, Kelly.
Sorry about that. In terms of how we define equity, some ideas were providing the tools or materials that meets the needs of a particular person or group for that moment of time, giving everyone an equal opportunity to communicate to their level of comfort, and ensuring the benefits. One DOT is focusing on actually an equity statement, and I'm paraphrasing this: ensuring the benefits and burdens of transportation systems, services, and investments are fair and just, ensuring the people of historically underserved communities share in the power of decision making. I think that's really important. How do we communicate why it's important? And some of the conversation really brought out how this is a difficult conversation to have, because some people just are simply not going to want to engage in the discussion. They don't want their investments to consider equity. One of the approaches to that is maybe sharing that by getting a wider input is more beneficial to every project, and how that project will serve that community over the longer horizon of time, and that government spending is always more wise when we have a broad consultation base. There's an opportunity there to build trust with the community. And we need a good sense of why DEI is important on a global scale, and how we need to embrace everyone in bringing their inputs and understanding how the impacts of those decisions and outcomes happen. So how do we promote it? Scenario planning was one recommendation, and communication is the biggest key to Catalyst. Just the act of communicating. And jumping down to the last, research gaps, potentially one is balancing the principles of asset management with integrating equity and decision making. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thanks, Kelly. All right, I'm looking at the clock and everything too, so it's just next up we have Kat Cahill, for Communications Group number 1.
Yeah, I think
Corey?
I'm filling in for Kat. Real quickly, we talked about the equity, equality, how a number of these terms that are used in this space, while there's best of intentions, as these conversations are are happening. There's a lot of lack of clarity on the specific terms and what they mean, and they mean different things to different people. And that's a real challenge as we think about communication. There's also different levels of maturity, both internally and externally across, even at the micro, at the district level, to all the way up to a national level. There's just different levels of maturity as you're engaging in these conversations. Again, both internally and externally, and that is problematic. We also talked about that equity is a top priority and should be, and that people are embracing that in different ways, looking at future opportunities for conversations. From an internal perspective, there was some desired discussions of book clubs and really engaging in some of these difficult conversations in a more informal way at work as a best practice. Externally, we'd like to see future webinars on best practice of how we really engage everyone in conversations about projects and planning and operations in all of our organizations.
Matt, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm going to skip over me and go to Ryan, who's doing organizational management and culture. I'll do cleanup basically.
Sure. Our group had the organizational management culture, and we started out with questions related to just sort of how is this stuff driven in your culture? How is equity sort of promoted? There were several different examples, which was great to hear, some of which were a little more top down, starting with at the political level. Most of us report to the governor, and some of the states, have sort of thou shalt, and so it gets done, which is good. But we also had an example of someone sort of home growing it internally and pushing it upward and getting it approved, which I personally would think is of great interest in how that got done. We talked about just sort of the focus and how the culture focuses. Many of us are, as William put it, focused on the outputs. Culturally, we're pavement condition, bridge condition, not the people it serves. And so shifting that focus can be hard. We're focused on 100 years from now rather than short-term needs. We also talked about just how we can strategies to bake these things in. Talked about qualitative, quantitative, starting with the qualitative pieces, putting them in our plans. These are how we communicate with our people internally and externally, and then you build towards that quantitative piece. We talked about internal and external organizations, how we're structured. Obviously, many of us use HR to structure towards that internal equity piece. Externally, we have many different models for that. A couple of things I think were really interesting that I want to finish on is that there was concerns in our group. When the culture looks at these things, they want high quality products. They want to provide high quality pavements and things like that. And when you put in this people piece, how is that going to affect the long-term performance? And then lastly, creating scores and that for equity when you do performance-based planning and programming. These scores related to equity, they have to capture a wide range of considerations, and sometimes boiling it down to one score can be quite the challenge. So I'll stop there. Great,
thanks, Ryan. And then last up, before we get to our poll that Abby has put into the chat already, so feel free to go take that, is Gary Van Such with Organizational Management Group number 1.
Yeah, thanks. And we put some notes in the comments already. If culture is indeed the beliefs and words and behaviors of an organization, first thing is you've got to be able to communicate with the folks that you are trying to help. So make sure that things are digestible, and make sure that you are be able to translate documents into folks' language. Get directly into their language. We actually talked about some examples of some executives showing the right kind of actions even early on regarding equity. At some point, some good comments during the conversation that environmental justice and equity are fairly new. There are different models on how projects would be developed, and there are a lot of unknowns at this point. So it'd be useful to have, some research or some guidance on that, even some research and guidance on best practices for addressing or engaging folks in those diverse communities, the tribal communities, Hawaiian Native communities. Can we use monies to, like we do other places, to help engage those folks, to pay them for their, compensate them for their time? A really robust discussion around, the beliefs and words and behaviors that would lead us to more equity in the future. I know we have limited time. I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Gary. So I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative. Abby, if we can go to the next slide with the poll. So I think the idea here is to brainstorm about what would you want to see as some next steps when it comes to addressing TPM and equity. What do you want to see more webinars, more meetings, more conversations about this? How do you want to have those conversations? Are there toolkits? Are there data sets that need to come? Whatever. If people have ideas, please put them there, and then I will do a quick summary from breakout group number 3, which is the organizational management and culture breakout group number 3. And I get the pleasure of saying just ditto. No, I'm just joking. What they said, but I think the big takeaway for us was, number one, was sort of a definition of equity that can be used as part of the analysis process. That's kind of how I'm summarizing this. Is that we shared some really good pictures, some sort of visual definitions of what equity is. One was the apple tree, and making this so all people can sort of access the apples in the apple tree, or the bicycles, and making sure you have the right type of bicycle for each person, not just one size kind of fits all. But how do you take those types of sort of visual definitions and translate them into ones that we can use as part of planning and analysis with the data sets and everything? How are we defining equity in terms of age, race, income levels, poverty levels, that sort of thing? Or is it something else? Is there guidance needed on that? And then the other thing I guess I'll mention, because we started with the third question, was many of the agencies are addressing equity within their plans, but I think John talked about how they're trying to not be sort of this is my interpretation, not be sort of secondary or part of the plan, but more inherent, integrated into the plan as part of the process. It's not the sort of secondary question, it's a primary question that gets addressed as part of the plan, integrating it into the actual process. So that was kind of a quick summary from group number 3 for organizational management and culture. And see some of the other things. Chat's coming in. So I think we have some people can kind of read on the screen what's going on. So thanks for these ideas. We will take these and summarize them. We're going to put together some sort of a brief summary of this session. I'm not gonna read through all these. There's some great ideas coming up there, but I do have 3:32. So let me sort of close us out for today. So first off, I just want to say thank you to everybody for participating in today's webinar. As William said, it can be sort of a challenging topic. It can be a politically charged topic, but I think as professionals and just good friends and colleagues, I think we can have a very good conversation about this now and in the future. This was one of many topics that we're having for our TPM webinar series. The next one is going to cover target setting. And specifically, I just want to mention that we have 2 sort of ongoing NCHRP research projects on target setting. One that is recently completed is Making Targets Matter. And the other one that is coming to completion is Effective Target Setting. I forget the numbers, but if you Google them, they will come up, some good resources for you, but we'll be talking about that during our next TPM webinar, which will be in May. So beyond that, we'd love to hear other ideas for webinars that you would like to see throughout calendar year 2022. You can email them directly to me, mhardy@ashto.org. Again, thanks to our great partner, FHWA. I think Steve Gay is still on. It's kind of a happy and a sad day because Steve has been a great partner. And if many of you didn't know, Steve is retiring. I think it's as of April 2nd. So a big round of applause for Steve. And thanks for all the for being I mean, first and foremost, a great friend, and to me, a great partner with the states and FHWA. Let me just say any words, anything from you, Steve, that you want to say?
Hey, thank you, Matt. And what's made it so enjoyable is working with you all, trying to make a difference to make our highways better. Hey, what do I always say, Matt? Thank you for your interest in Federal Highway Administration's Performance and Asset Management Program.
Yep.
Kidding. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And it is April 2nd. I said, why not
Yes.
April 1st? Because April 1st is like the Friday. He goes, he didn't want to do it on April Fool's Day in case people didn't think that it was a joke. So anyways, but thanks, Steve. Have fun in retirement. That's all. And also thanks to William Johnson for putting together the great presentation that set all of this up. A lot of great information there. So thanks for the time in doing that. And I think that's about it. You can go to TPM TPM-portal.com to get more information. And with that, I think I'll end it there. So thanks, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.